Hello and welcome to another video. In this video I'll be replacing a Note 8 screen for quite cheap. I'll be using a minor defects replacement screen which has tiny black spots, but the touch works perfectly. Here you can see the end result, so there's these black areas in the corners and edges of the screen, but otherwise it's like new. In other words, the display has taken a hit, but the glass on top has been changed for a new one, and the only remaining damage is the black spots on the screen, but it doesn't hinder use or touch in any way. I think these minor defect screens are a good option when you're replacing a screen on an old phone that has AMOLED screen and you don't want to pay the full price of a new and perfect condition AMOLED. The screen I got also comes with a frame already attached, so I don't need to glue the new screen to the old frame. I'll only have to move the motherboard from the old frame to the new frame. I'm preparing this phone for a friend, so I don't know the passcode. If you don't know the code, you can't switch a Samsung phone off, but you can force it off by holding power and volume down until the screen turns black, and then immediately switch to pressing power, Bixby button and volume up at the same time. It will boot to recovery and then it can be switched off. When the phone is switched off, next thing is to remove the back panel, and it has quite a strong adhesive attaching it to the phone. I used quite a bit of heat, but it still takes some time. The back panel on this phone has already some cracks in it, but I wanted to save the back panel from cracking even more, so that we can put the same back panel back on the phone once the repair is done. Next to the fingerprint sensor, there's a flex cable that can be easily damaged while prying the back panel off. And here's the old black frame and the new silver frame. And first thing we need to do is to remove all the screws. Next we need to pry off the plastic shielding very carefully. The upper part contains the wireless charging module, and the reason why I was careful to not heat the phone up too much was that the wireless charging module easily breaks when it gets too much heat, and then the phone won't boot up. It will show too high temperature icon or something similar. It's cheap to replace that part, though, if it does break. Next, to lift the motherboard out of the old frame, a lot of flex cables need to be unplugged, and it's better to use a plastic pry tool for that, not a flathead screwdriver or anything metallic. There's also another small screw in the upper right corner of the phone, and also the SIM tray needs to be taken out of the phone, as well as the front cameras. After that you can carefully pry the motherboard up and it will detach from the lower part of the circuit board, which contains the charging port. Next there's this part which contains some sensors which needs to be transferred over to the new frame. Also the earpiece needs to be transferred over. It's easy to break the earpiece when prying it off the old frame, so be careful with that. The headphone jack should lift off when carefully pulling on it, and then the rest of the charging board assembly can be removed. The haptic feedback engine under it needs to be also transferred to the new frame. Then you can move over the charging port board and the headphone jack. Next is the most difficult part, which is prying the battery of the old frame, since Samsung uses super strong glue to glue the battery to the frame. Also, the battery easily breaks when too much force is used to pry it off the phone, and that can be even dangerous. So what I did was I used 70% isopropyl alcohol. It weakens the glue. I had to apply it again after a while. This part needs some patience to properly pry the battery off without bending or damaging it. After letting the rubbing alcohol weaken the glue for some time, I got the battery pried off the frame. Remember not to use flathead screwdrivers like I did, or anything else sharp or metallic, since that can puncture the battery and is not safe. Plastic prying tools are much better for that. When the charging port board is in place, the main board can be installed in place. There's quite many of these flex cables, and it's important to check that no flex cables are under the main board. Other than the charging port board flex cable, that's of course supposed to be under the main board. Next, all the flex cables need to be connected, and the motherboard can be secured down with the black screw. Also, the front cameras can be put back at this point. At this point I installed the plastic shielding back on, and also the battery. Remember that the battery is not yet attached properly, so it may drop out and it may tear the battery connector of the motherboard, which would be bad. So remember to hold the phone so that the battery doesn't drop out of the phone. Before installing the motherboard and battery permanently, let's test the screen first. And the touch and brightness controls, as well as both rear and front cameras, work like they should, so we can proceed to install the parts permanently on the phone. After switching the phone off, of course, I removed the battery again and replaced the old adhesive with some new double-sided adhesive tape. After installing the battery properly back in the phone, the SIM tray can be reinserted. Next, I secured the plastic shielding down with the screws, and then I removed the old adhesive tape from the back panel. To glue the back panel back on the phone, I used B7000 glue. If you're using glue to attach the back panel back onto your phone, remember that don't put too much glue where the power and volume buttons are, because they might get filled with glue and not work once the glue cures. Before putting the back panel on, remember to connect the fingerprint scanner's flex cable. It's quite short cable, so it can be quite fiddly. And before the glue dries and the back panel is on place permanently, it's good to check the back camera so that the lens is clean. I used some rubber bands to hold the back panel on properly and let the glue dry for a day. The S Pen of this Galaxy Note had been lost, so I got a new S Pen from the same seller who sold these minor defect replacement screens.